Hello, Internet friends. It's me, Logan Albright, back with another book review for your viewing pleasure. And today I'm talking about the science fiction classic, Time Enough for Love by Robert A. Heinlein. I've done another Heinlein book on this channel before. I talked about The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. This is one of his, not one of his most well-known works. People who know Heinlein generally know him for A Stranger in a Strange Land, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, and Starship Troopers. This one is slightly less well-known. It was written in 1973. It's his longest work. And it's probably one of his weirdest works, or at least the ones that I've read. He's written like 35 books, and I've only read 3 of them. So, but this is an odd one. The story is basically about this longest-lived human being, Lazarus Long, or as he was born, Woodrow Wilson Smith, in 1912. And it's about, he's come to close to the end of his life. He's old, he's tired, he's kind of ready to be done. But he gets rejuvenated, and people are forcing him to kind of tell his life story and get out all of his memories and all of his wisdom throughout the years before he dies. So the first half of the book takes a sort of reverse Arabian Nights style where he has to tell all of his stories before he's able to die. And so there's a series of vignettes, there's a series of like stories from his life that are unrelated to the main plot, the framing device, if you will. That's fairly conventional as far as it goes, but halfway through the book takes a hard left turn into crazy Heinlein territory, dealing with a lot of the themes that Heinlein likes to deal with. He was very iconoclastic, he liked to tear down taboos. He was basically an anarchist, which I quite enjoy. If you watch my review for A Moon is a Harsh Mistress, you see he talks about that a lot in that book. There's a lot of anti-government stuff in this book as well. One of the things he also tackles is sexual taboos, including the taboo against incest, which makes a lot of people really uncomfortable. I was looking at reviews of this when I was preparing this, and it seems to be a very divisive book. People either love it or hate it. There's a lot of 1-star reviews and a lot of 5-star reviews, largely because people were uncomfortable with the incest parts. But there is a way in which this makes sense because Lazarus Long is the product of a selective breeding experiment from the early 20th century, which actually happened in real life, something called positive eugenics, where they tried to incentivize what they consider to be healthy gene pools, people with healthy genes, to mate with each other in order to improve the race. It's kind of a dark chapter in American history that not a lot of people talk about, but it's dealt with sort of tangentially here. And so in order to create this race of super long-lived people like Lazarus Long, they are very obsessed with genetic purity and making sure that there aren't genetic defects that would happen through things like incest. So there's a couple of thought experiments that happen in the book where he talks about whether or not the taboo makes any sense apart from the risk of reproductive defects. If there's no risk of reproductive defects, does the taboo make any sense, or is it just a superstition? That's dealt with in detail. Heinlein had this weird fixation on free love, where if you read Stranger in a Strange Land, he talks a lot about, having these free-form polyamorous communes where everybody's sleeping with everybody else. So this kind of fits in to his whole thing. I think he manages to pull it off in an interesting, thought-provoking way without being too creepy, and I definitely think the book has a very interesting plot and is very unique in terms of science fiction. It goes off in a lot of different directions that you wouldn't expect from the basic plot. It definitely doesn't get boring because he keeps changing up the narrative. There's time travel that happens in it. There's all thoughts about artificial intelligence and computers and whether or not they can become people. There's a lot of interesting ideas that are explored, and I think there's a good reason why Heinlein is referred to sometimes as the dean of science fiction. He's one of the major writers in the genre, along with Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and Ray Bradbury and those guys. So I think his books are very thought-provoking and very different from the other writers at the time. He really inserted social commentary and politics and sexual mores and taboos into his works in a way that other science fiction writers were not doing. They were more focused on the science, or they were more focused on the fantasy aspect of it, or on just adventure stories, space operas, that sort of thing. Heinlein was one of the first science fiction writers to really be focused on scientific accuracy and hard science in his writing, and so he really tries to be correct in his scientific details. There's a lot of detail in here about genetics, which I'm not really qualified to say whether it's accurate or not, but it feels pretty accurate when you're reading it. It feels like he went the extra mile to try to make sure he knew what he was talking about in this stuff. And I think you have to appreciate that as a fan of science fiction, someone who really did the legwork and did the homework to try to do a good job on making sure the science makes sense. Time Enough for Love has relationships to a lot of his other books, I'm led to believe. I haven't actually read the other books, but there's recurring characters who show up in various different books and it's sort of they all take place within the same universe, so you run into the same people or the same stories a few times. I intend to read more of them because I found this one quite enjoyable, and I'd like to find out more about his universe. But there's this whole future history that he talks about, where you learn about the future of the human race and the Howard family, which is this genetically superior family that is extremely long-lived. As for the edition of this book, unfortunately, the only one I could get is this paperback by Ace Science Fiction. As you can see, it's pretty beat up after only one reading. It's a pretty long book, but it took a little while to read it, but I don't think I treated it that badly. It's pretty chewed up as it is. I wish I could get better editions of these books, maybe hardcovers. I understand that they're coming out with a new edition of one of his other books in the same series called The Number of the Beast later this year. Hopefully it will be a nice hardback copy, or at least a more durable paperback copy that won't fall apart like this mass market paperback has. So in summary, I really enjoyed Time Enough for Love. I think Heinlein is an extremely inventive writer. I think he's an entertaining writer. He's got a lot to say, a lot of social commentary. There's a section in the book that I really liked. It's called Extracts from the Diary of Lazarus Long. And they're like aphorisms or little sayings about things he's learned over the years, and they're highly quotable, and they're very funny, and they express a lot of his skepticism of government and a lot of his kind of rugged individualism. So I find that very enjoyable and quite funny. But Heinlein's great, and you should read some of his books. I recommend this one. I recommend The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, and I love the first half of Stranger in a Strange Land. I may have to go back and reread that now that I've read a little bit more into his bibliography. That's been my review. I've been Logan Albright. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.